Welcome in episode 239 of the Skate Podcast. I'm Brian DeFelice, joined by Bridget Prue and Scott McLaughlin. The Bruins got an impressive 3-2 victory over the Dallas Stars in Dallas the other night. Bridget and Scott, opening shifts.
Well, I think it was a really interesting game from Mason Lohrei, who we've obviously been pretty focused on as he wraps up his third NHL game. He scores his first goal, which is obviously great, and it was a nice play. He jumps up into the offense, takes a pass from Danton Heinen, and snaps a good shot past Jake Ottinger. Then he also ends up getting benched in the third period and only plays one shift over the final 12 plus minutes. Got caught flat-footed on the rush that ends up leading to the Stars' first goal of the game. And then was on the bench, was stable to the bench for a little bit after that, got one more shift, sort of got caught out of position on a rebound chance, led to another Dallas scoring chance. And then that was it for the night. So really interesting sort of highs and lows of a rookie with his first goal and first extended benching. So I think it certainly becomes an interesting conversation just about where we think he is, how he's playing, and kind of what this all means going forward for him.
Yeah, definitely want to get back to that. I feel like the defense is still probably the biggest storyline, considering all of the absences that are still there. McAvoy out for one more game, and we'll get an update on Forbert, I assume, Scott, but correct me if I'm wrong. We haven't seen anything that suggests he's playing Thursday.
He's still day-to-day. The Bruins didn't practice Tuesday, so we'll find out more on Wednesday when they practice.
Okay, so we will keep you posted on that. But my opening shift has to do with the fourth line because I think it had to have been their best game of the season. And as of right now, it's Danton Heinen with Johnny Beecher and Oscar Steen, and Beecher also had his first career goal. So, and his was the opening goal of the game. It was really a pretty shot. It was funny because he was like, I think that was the nicest goal I've ever scored. And which is like, it was a good goal. So, he was very happy with it. And he actually got over 13 minutes of playing time, which is pretty much the exact same amount that Matt Patra as the third line center got. And that fourth line kept getting rewarded with ice time because they had a majority of their shifts. They spent most of the time in the offensive zone. They just looked very strong. They were working together. They were getting guys in front of the net. Danton Heinen had another good game. I thought Oscar Steen looked good, and Beecher strong at the dot again and with a goal.
So for me, every team is going to have their deficiencies and things to work on, but 10-1-1 through the first 12 games of the season, the Bruins just continue to be an absolute juggernaut in the regular season over the last couple of calendar years. And early on this season, it was easy to kind of point at Chicago twice and Anaheim and San Jose, although Anaheim is playing really well. They've won 6 straight games of late, so maybe that win against Anaheim is more impressive than we thought. But my point is the 10 wins the Bruins have had this year, a lot of them now, more than half have been against really solid teams that you expect to be there at the end of the season. And, they've gotten wins over the Kings, the Panthers, the Red Wings, who are off to a great start this year. Obviously, Toronto and Dallas last night. Like they're getting wins against quality teams. So it's really impressive. Again, it's a lot of moving parts this year, and you look at some of the problems other teams are having. I mean, you look at New Jersey, Carolina, Tampa, Toronto, all these teams in the East that everybody, including us, kind of expected to be the cream of the crop in the East. And it's like the Bruins are just light years ahead of them in the standings. They're second overall in the NHL in the standings, 2 points behind Vegas, first in the East. So the Bruins are just, are we taking them for granted a little bit? I mean, maybe they keep taking care of business.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because it's record-wise, it looks similar to last year, where it's just like 10-1-1, one of the best teams in the league, but it looks different. That they are not, and now especially against better teams, they're not dominating the way that they did last year. They're not just cruising to 2, 3, 4 goal wins. A lot of these games are close. They're going down to the wire in the third period. And I know, they've blown a couple of them, Anaheim and Detroit, their 2 losses. But this is what it looks like for a lot of teams. Like, a lot of teams play close games. Someone ends up with an extra attacker situation. The team with the lead is biting their fingernails. Like, we forget because it happened so infrequently last year, but this is usually what the NHL looks like. And they're finding a way to win more of these games, obviously a lot more than they're losing, which is, encouraging and the sign of a good team that you find a way. And obviously, he wasn't our opening shift, but he wasn't any of our opening shifts. But a big reason for it is their goaltending. And Jeremy Swayman was awesome once again Monday night and is now 6-0-0, leads the NHL in save percentage and goals against average. So that's a huge part of it. But, Dallas made a strong push in that third period. And, kind of had the Bruins on their heels a little bit, spent a lot of time in the Boston zone, but they find a way to get the win, and Swayman obviously stands tall.
Yeah, I mean, especially in that last, I would say, like 8 or so minutes of the game, he saved them a few times. He came up huge. He's jumped on rebounds. He's looked good the whole season. He seems extra confident. Not that he's ever not been confident, but he just seems to have taken a step forward even more. And yeah, huge part of the record, same as last season, has to do with the goaltending, especially enough that covers up the holes that you might have on defense. Because Scott, your opening shift's about Mason Lohrei having kind of an up and down first 3 games of his NHL career. And you can make up for some of the flaws in the defense and, in the penalty kill if you have a good goalie or 2, like the Bruins do.
Yeah, well, I mean, a team that doesn't have a good goalie or 2 like the Bruins do is Edmonton, right? They're another example of a team that, they put Jack Campbell on waivers today. And Edmonton, for the longest time, we've always kind of said it's their team is McDavid and Draisaitl. And McDavid hasn't had a great offensive start to the season. Like, when they look kind of human and their goaltending is what it is, like, you have a team, and Edmonton's 2-8-1. They're not a 2-8-1 roster, but a lack of goaltending can do that to you. And on the other side of the spectrum, you have Boston, who's just just 10-1-1. Like, I mean, and it's crazy. Like, you look at the standings, and like Tampa Bay is 5-4 or 5-4-1, and Toronto, New Jersey, all these teams have 14 to 17 points. Like, those are good starts. It's just not 10-1-1. Like, it's just, that's what goaltending and defensive structure does for you, which is, not to tip our own hats, but we kind of acknowledge that in the offseason. We're like, this team's going to be good still because they have goaltending and defense better than anybody else really in the league, the combination of those two. And you're seeing it in on full display right now.
Yeah, I think some idiot on some Bruins podcast picked the Oilers to get to the Stanley Cup final. And I don't remember who that was, but by the way,
they're second to last in the league, and they're minus 18 on the season. But they're
it's awful. It's brutal.
Yeah.
They've lost 3 times to Vancouver already. Which, by the way, where did this Canucks start come from? Like, they've been awesome.
Rick Tocchet.
Yeah, I mean, they look like, and it looks legit. Like, it doesn't look fluky at all. That looks like a really good team.
Well, goaltending, Scott. They have goaltending in Thatcher Demko. Like, if they don't have goaltending for that could be a situation where we've seen that Canucks team flounder because the goaltending wasn't there, but they had talent. They always had Hughes and Pedersen and Besser, who had some personal issues recently, and JT Miller. They've had talent, but when you don't have goaltending, it can drown you. And fortunately, in Boston, we don't have that issue.
Yeah, but we will be circling back later in the podcast to the whole Bruins Oilers blockbuster trade discussion because that got a lot of reactions. So we will touch on some of that.
A lot of people responded to our tweet and to our podcast, in the comments and everything. So yeah, we're gonna get back to that. But we should stick to the game against Dallas. Just thoughts on maybe some other players that you thought had good games. I have a few thoughts on that third line with Patra, Frederick, and Geeky. I don't know where you guys want to start there.
Well, Bridget, I'll build off your opening shift. You nailed it. The fourth line, that was their best game of the season. Before Monday night, no member of the fourth line, not just the three who played last night, but anyone who's played on the fourth line this season had scored a goal yet. A couple of them had been on the ice for goals and had helped set some up, but none of them had actually scored one. So Beecher's was the first. And, just a really nice play by him taking the space that was there. And then they set up Lohrei's goal as well. That's the line that's out there. Steen's in on the forecheck. Heinen makes the pass out to Lohrei. And they were in the offensive zone. They were the Bruins' best line in that game, like without question. And what makes that even more encouraging is that on the last podcast we talked about needing to bounce back from the loss in Detroit, and it was going to be a tough challenge. Dallas is a really good team. Well, for that bounce back to be led, in large part by your fourth line, by players like Johnny Beecher and Oscar Steen and Danton Heinen, who just signed, that's really encouraging. It's sometimes you wonder, especially with this team, with all the turnover, all the new faces, you wonder, are they going to be too reliant just on their star players for stuff like that, for bounce backs, for the big games when they need it? And the Bruins weren't on Monday night. They got it from other guys up and down the lineup. And, I'm sure we're going to get more into Lohrei, but him scoring the goal too, that's huge, even though, he ends up not finishing the game as strong as he started. But for that bounce back effort to be led by guys lower in the lineup, less experienced, is something I think the Bruins can build off.
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of gives you shades of the 2017, 2018 season when, you had at the time a young Danton Heinen, Charlie McAvoy, Jake DeBrusk, Anders Bjork, Bridget's favorite. That at the time, they were all kind of doing their thing, and it was a good influx of youth. But now it's kind of you're seeing, Mason Lohrei and Matt Patra and Johnny Beecher. Let's just stick with those three guys. If those guys are developing into legit NHLers for you this year, that's an amazing development for the Bruins. Obviously, you hope for that, right? When you draft Johnny Beecher in the first round, Mason Lohrei, and Patra, you hope for these things. But as we've seen, draft picks are a gamble. You never know for sure, and they desperately needed some young kids to step up. And to their credit, they've been given opportunities. It hasn't been perfect at all times, and yeah, we'll talk about Lohrei for sure. But sticking to Bridget's opening shift, Johnny Beecher just looks like he reminds me of somebody who, when he gets comfortable in his own skin, which he is, I think, but more reps in the NHL, and I see a more, eventually, I think I see a more polished, offensively polished Sean Corrali type player. Big body, can skate well, but I think when he gets to his NHL peak, I think he'll provide more offense than a Sean Corrali, but that's great. That's a great guy to have in your bottom six. Obviously, Patra we know about, and Lohrei. So to have three rookies step in this year is really impressive for any team, let alone Boston, but it's a great development.
Yep. And he actually has the best, or the highest of the four centers. He has the highest face-off percentage. I know he's not getting the same kind of matchups as Charlie Coyle is at the dot and Zacha, but he's done what he needs to do in terms of winning face-offs. And he has spent time on penalty kill. He has gotten his minutes 5-on-5 and shorthanded, and he's looked good. He's looked comfortable. He doesn't look like a liability. And I would say the same thing about the other two players that have been on the fourth line with Steen and Heinen. I don't think that they look like they're a line that you want to take off the ice as quick as you possibly can. They've actually shown that they can bring a lot of energy. They're young, they're fast. And Heinen, this was Heinen's fourth game. And I think he's looked more and more up to speed as time's gone on. So the first game that he played, he maybe was a little bit rusty, though he did have some moments where he contributed. And you see him, he also was part of the play that got Lohrei his first ever point, and then he's part of the play for his first goal as well. So he can be an important player. I do see him, Danton Heinen, fitting into the lineup kind of wherever you might need him. So when Lucci comes back, what happens to Danton Heinen, what happens to Oscar Steen, we don't know, but I think that Heinen has made a really good case for himself.
Yeah, certainly see Heinen sticking around. We touched on it last pod. Even if he's not a regular in the lineup, he's such a good Swiss Army knife to have as your 13th forward. We also touched on Steen, who now is 5 games into the 10 he can play before he would have to go through waivers again. Which, Bridge, I think you said, unfortunately, I think it means he's probably going to get sent down before those 10 games, even if the Bruins aren't completely healthy up front yet. But, the overarching theme here is they clearly have good depth, which I think we knew, right? All the discussions we had before was whether they had enough top 6 talent or whether the, Zach and Coyle could handle more as centers. And of course, Patra completely changed that conversation. But we knew that they were deep. And you see that now where it's Heinen and Steen sort of got their chances to start playing regularly only because Lucic and Lauko are out. And they've played well, and they've, I think, been making, pretty much the most of the ice time they've gotten in these games that they've played. But Lucic and Lauko were both playing pretty well before they got hurt too. So, and then you still have, we saw, I think, one game of Jesper Boquist, and, didn't go great, but he's played in the NHL. He's certainly a guy you can plug in. Mark McLaughlin's still down in Providence. Patrick Brown, I know all of Bruins Twitter hates him, thinks he's the worst hockey player ever, but he's another good depth piece. He can play wing or center. He wins draws. He can kill penalties, handle heavy defensive zone starts. So every team's looking for depth, and I think we're seeing from the Bruins, at least up front, that they have it. Certainly they're being tested even more on defense right now with McAvoy. We still haven't heard any official word on his appeal. I guess we're going to have to hear Wednesday. They can only shave one game off at this point, so either he's still suspended for Thursday or he's not. My guess is he still will be. But we know Grzelcyk on long-term IR, and Forbort still out through the road trip. We'll see about Thursday. But, interested in what you guys thought of Lohrei, Wotherspoon, Mitchell, all 3 of them Monday, unless you had, further thoughts on the forwards.
Mitchell reminds me kind of like a little bit of Clifton. He's kind of robust and a little bit just kind of he's a little bit all over the place. He's okay, but I thought he was fine. Witherspoon, there was a play where he just had an opportunity to hit Jason Robertson at the blue line and just skated, didn't make contact with him, and Robertson had a grade A scoring chance, or led to a grade A scoring chance. So again, like I kind of said last episode, my attention's more on Lohrei and how he's doing. I see the other 2 as just placeholders, but I see Lohrei as a potential fixture. And I would say that I'm glad that he scored his first goal. I'm glad he got his first point against Toronto. He's clearly producing offensively. He's helping the team win. And I would also say I'm glad he's making mistakes, and I'm glad that he's learning at the NHL level. This is kind of the give and take, Bridget. I think you mentioned that off the top. There's a give and take there, and I want that to happen. You need to learn through those mistakes, and I think the Bruins hopefully will allow him to continue to learn those tough lessons. But he's also still helping them win games too. So it's been a little Jekyll and Hyde, but I just still think the offensive upside in general far exceeds some of his mistakes. I know some have been costly, but let it happen. Let him learn.
I would say of those 3 guys, the Detroit game was collectively the worst game for each one of them. I think they all looked a little bit more on solid footing in the game against Dallas. The D pairings were rotated a lot. Everybody played a little bit of time with everybody, it felt like. I would say that of Mitchell, Witherspoon, and Lohrei, Mitchell has been the most consistent. Lohrei has had his ups and downs, which he had higher highs. Obviously, he's got 2 points in those 3 games, a goal and an assist. Mitchell, I think just though he doesn't have the same kind of upside. I think he's more consistent defensively, and he can jump into the offense. Witherspoon, you just hope that he doesn't make some bad reads and give the puck away in the wrong situation. So that's really my thoughts on those three in the 3 games that they've come in to replace McAvoy, Grzelcyk, and Forbort.
Yeah, I think Witherspoon and Mitchell were okay Monday against Dallas. Brian, I agree with you. Like they're just placeholders. Mitchell maybe 6th round as a 7th defenseman, which he was to start the year, just because he can step in. He has some NHL experience. Jim Montgomery obviously likes him, but but he can be a little bit reckless though, and take some chances he doesn't really need to take. But I think he sort of feels like he has to, because he kind of has that label of like, well, he's sort of the more offensive defenseman, and it's like that's supposed to be part of what he brings. But you want it to be controlled. So Lohrei obviously is the most interesting of the 3, and I'm also okay with like letting him make mistakes at the NHL level and learning from it, but it has to stay within reason. And I think what you saw Monday is clearly there were a couple too many for Jim Montgomery to trust him down the stretch. And, it's kind of telling when Witherspoon and Mitchell are still getting shifts in the final 5-10 minutes of the third period, and Lohrai's not. Like that's not a great sign. Like part of what he's going to have to prove at this level is that he can be trusted in those situations and help them preserve a lead down the stretch in a 1 or 2 goal game. I'm curious if you guys had any problem with the benching, because when I tweeted out that he had only had 1 shift in the last 12 minutes, there were a lot of reactions of like, I thought we were done with this when they moved on from Cassidy. What is Montgomery doing? This is crazy. Like 1 mistake and he gets benched. And my counter is like, it wasn't 1 mistake. It was a couple on Monday night. It was also a couple on Saturday. Like yes, we've seen the flashes offensively, but some of the defensive miscues and misreading plays in transition. I don't want to say I don't want to exaggerate, but there's been like 4 or 5 of them now. It's not like it's only been 1 or 2.
I don't think it was so like what they're referring to is Cassidy benching people to send a message. I think this was a functional benching. Like this wasn't a send you a message only kind of benching. It was like, okay, I'm going to put the guys out there that are going to help us hold on to this game, because the wheels were starting to fall off. Things were getting close. It was a nail biter to the finish, and you're putting the guys out there that you think are going to be better at shutting down the Dallas offense. And if you haven't seen that from him earlier in the game, then it's not just trying to send him a message. It's okay, I'm going to send out Carlo and Lindholm super often and, mix in the other guys. But if you don't trust him in those matchups for whatever reason that you saw earlier in the game, it's not just like, hey, kid, you're sitting. It's like, no, we're putting the guys out there that we think give us a better chance to win. So I think that's there's a distinction to be made between those 2 different kinds of benchings.
I would agree with that. I would say the only benching that would really catch my eye or rub me the wrong way is if he gets sent back down to Providence, because as long as he's at the NHL level, like that's kind of what I care about right now. I want to see him just continue to get these reps and develop at this level, because clearly, even though he's having some defensive mishaps, he's able to keep up with the NHL pace of play and contribute at the same time offensively. So he just needs to like, for example, there was a play where I'm trying to remember which goal it was, but it may have been, I forget which Dallas goal it was, but basically he chased Jamie Benn into the corner and just like he was out of position and realized he was out of position and tried to get back to the front of the net. Or Jamie Benn was in front of the net. He was chasing a Dallas star in the corner, realized he was in the wrong, stopped, tried to get back, but by that time it was a little bit too late. The shot already got into the net and it was tipped in. So some of it's just like film, like just like remember where you're not supposed to be in your own zone. And it's nothing too crazy, but if the Bruins send him back down to Providence and like a Mitchell or Witherspoon is still up, like that's a benching I would be upset about. But other than that, I didn't really have an issue with that in game. To Bridges' point, it was kind of a circumstantial best chance to win right now defensively.
Yeah, as we sit here right now, I still want to see him get basically the trial until Grizzly comes back, which won't be until after Thanksgiving. But as I said in the last pod, though, like if like 3 or 4 tough games start to pile up, then I do think you could see him sent down before then. Hopefully, obviously, he bounces back, plays better the next game, and you don't have to worry about that. But it will become an interesting conversation when Grizzly returns if the Bruins are completely healthy on the back end at that point, because I do think if there aren't like significant strides over these next couple of weeks, I do think you could see him get sent back down at that point. And I just feel like fans should start preparing for that now, because I think a lot are going to get mad if and when it happens. But there are clearly things that he still needs to work on and that are still developing. And I know like Ty Anderson made the point on Twitter of like he gets benched in a close game in the third period last night in Boston because the coach doesn't trust him. In Providence, he gets to play that entire third period and help the team close it out and learn how to do that. Like you have to actually like play in those situations to learn how to do it. But Bridget, to your point, like Montgomery is just doing what he thinks he has to do to win the game. So if that means not throwing Lohrei out there to let him, learn through experience and growing pains, then so be it. Like he's just trying to get 2 points.
But how do you in that circumstance, right? So you mentioned in Providence, he's playing in those moments, not sitting on the bench. Okay. Well, he's got 2 points in 3 NHL games, his first 3 NHL games. Let's say by the time Grizzly comes back to full health, say he's got like 10 or 12 games under his belt and he's got like 8 or 9 points. How do you send that down to Providence and not just let him try to keep developing at the NHL level? Maybe you just keep being selective with his ice time and his situational play. I know you want to get him playing in all circumstances. I get it. But how do you hypothetically say he's got like 7 to 9 points in 10 to 12 games? How do you send that down to Providence?
If with those numbers, you don't. If those are the numbers, then you don't. I think what you want to see is just building different parts of his game as time goes on. And I will point out that his 2 points already tied with Lindholm's 2 points, because Lindholm got his second assist in the game in Dallas. He has the same amount of points as Forbert, Shattenkirk, Mitchell. All of those defensemen are kind of sitting around that same location in the 2 point category. So yeah, he's already in 3 games been able to do that. I think that the issue is just having him work on certain things that if you don't feel like risking him out there, you might rather have him work on those things in Providence. That's the only. I don't know if I'm explaining that well enough, but
yeah. Well, and then along the same lines of what I just said about like playing in all situations, what if he's getting bumped off the PK when Forbert returns? What if he's played very little in the power play anyways up in Boston? He has gotten a little bit of time in the second unit. But what if that's completely gone once McAvoy returns? Because now you have McAvoy, Lindholm, Shattenkirk all ahead of him. Like, Mason Lohrei long term, if he reaches a ceiling, projects as someone who's playing in every situation across the board. So in Providence, he's doing that. If he's up here and he's not really getting PK time, and he's not getting power play time, and he's not really trusted in tight games where you need to preserve a lead, like at some point, I think it makes a lot of sense to send him back to Providence. But again, he still has a couple weeks here to prove that he can get better in those areas, and he absolutely still has an opportunity to earn a regular lineup spot and stick even after Grizzly comes back.
I think, Brian, your point, though, was that what if he's showing the defensive deficiencies but still getting involved enough in the offense to like hold on to the spot? Is that what?
Yeah, kind of. But also, I don't see a guy who's god awful defensively in these 3 games so far. He's had a couple of mishaps, but I haven't noticed a player who's been, making his team like he's still good in transition. It's his first 3 games. I wouldn't say he's been a liability every time he's out there. Just a couple of moments here and there, but he's also canceled those out with some production. Also like the whole going down to the AHL to play more minutes in all situations. I totally understand that. I do. What I would say is, and I'm not comparing the players necessarily, obviously, but how much time in Providence did Charlie McAvoy have, and how much time in Providence did Brandon Carlo have? Did Carlo play a whole season in Providence? I don't think so. I
think he made the team at a camp after the rookie development camp that season.
Right. So it is possible to have a player of a certain skill set learn on the fly in meaningful games at the NHL level.
And so to make a comparison to what you're saying, Carlo did that with Chara. And I feel like there's a similar, like, Lohrei could do that with Carlo. I feel like there's a similarity between those players' size, their reach, what they could learn from each other at that level. I get what you're saying, Ryan.
Yeah, my counter would be that Lohrei is a different player than McAvoy and Carlo, and has a different back. He didn't switch from forward to defense until he was 16. Like, that's kind of late in his development. It's part of the reason why he didn't get drafted the first year he was eligible. But he's a different kind of player. McAvoy comes up through the U.S. development program and plays at BU. Like, he has a much stronger foundation.
And anyone who comes through BU is NHL ready, according to Scott, because that's where Scott went.
Clearly, yeah. I was NHL ready when I left BU.
Of course. And you're in the big leagues now, Scott. So you're proof right there.
I mean,
Carlo was defense was always the strength of his game. So he at least had that. And the hope was like his offense would develop, and it has a little, but obviously, never quite came like super far along.
I think Brian's point was more that that's an option of how to get him to NHL speed alongside. And I think in this case, it's important to clarify, you need him playing on a pair with a decent partner, right? If he's out there with Mitchell, and not to be mean to Shattenkirk, but I don't think he needs to be out there with Carlo, really. So to think about it, when McAvoy comes back and Forbert comes back, what do the pairs look like? Like, who's he next to that we're going to see what he can do for the next few games before Grizzly comes back? Because that's going to be a big factor in how he does as well.
That's a good point. I also think that there are just certain players that I just think are above the AHL. And I think Lohrei, I just think he's already there. Like, I see him benefiting more from trying to defend NHL stars and caliber players than I do him getting minutes against, a first liner on Hershey who, can't crack Washington's lineup. Like, fundamentally you can learn things, but I just think he's a special player. He's a special talent. And I just don't think the NHL lights are too big for him. I just think he just has to learn on the fly a little bit. I don't think every prospect or players capable of learning on the fly at the NHL level, I think he's one of them. I think just like I thought McAvoy was in Carlo. And I know they're all different players and came from different backgrounds. And you can say what you want about him starting at defense at 16. But I just think that certain players can get away with learning on the fly at the NHL level. And I think he's one of them. That's the only point that I'm trying to make.
Yeah. And Bridget, you're right to point out the pairings. Like, I don't think he's been done any favors being paired with Ian Mitchell or even, honestly, even Shattenkirk, who I thought that first game against Toronto, when they ended up together in like third period and half the second period, they played well together in that game. But since then, like that, they've just not looked very good together. So I do think when Forbort comes back, your third pairing should be Forbort and Shattenkirk. And then Lohrei should be with either Carlo or McAvoy, is what I would do. Most likely you're probably going Lindholm Carlo, because as we've seen, Montgomery he's almost too addicted to that pairing for his own good. Like even when he wants to mix things up and like spread the wealth around a little, it's just so it's like, and I get it, they're one of, if not the best shutdown pairings in the NHL. So when you're facing a top line that has Jason Robertson, Joe Pavelski, and Roope Hintz on it, or Dylan Larkin and Alex DeBrincat on it, or Austin Matthews on it, like, yeah, it's almost like, duh, why wouldn't we use our shutdown pairing? But on the other hand, it does end up like hanging Lohrei out to dry. So getting McAvoy back certainly helps with that, because I do think you can put Lohrei and McAvoy together and give them, sort of more offensive zone shifts, manage them that way if you want to keep Lindholm Carlo as your shutdown pairing. And that should obviously help Lohrei.
Yeah, and it's going to get him more playing time. He's going to be out there because he's out there with McAvoy, and that's going to be a pair that gets a lot of ice time. So you're not only are you letting him play minutes that he's comfortable with playing big minutes, he's probably more comfortable with that than sitting for extended stretches of time. Like part of his game has always been eating up a lot of minutes. So you might be putting him in a more natural spot in more ways than one to play his game at the best of his ability. So that could be a completely different look. And obviously we're 3 games in and he's had some ups as well as the downs. So if he could just kind of be a little bit more consistent on the back end of things, I think he's still your best option to stick around. We've gotten a lot into the defense though. And I did mention, I want to talk about the third line and the top 6 as well, but just working. Well, we're kind of like working from the fourth line to the third line, second, first. So I wanted to talk about the Poitras line and get your thoughts on what it looked like, because in the second period they had a few shifts, one in particular that was really good, but Poitras was getting his ass kicked. Like he took a high stick to the face. He just took a bunch of hits along the boards. He got knocked to the ice. Like he was just getting his butt kicked, and he's on that line with Frederic, and Coach Montgomery said, we're going to put him with Frederic. It should, help discourage things like that. But we're talking about clean hits. We're talking about clean plays. He's not getting targeted. This is just what the NHL is like. And I'm noticing him kind of fighting through it and having to figure out a way around that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, certainly nobody is not going to stop playing hard hockey on somebody because Trent Frederic's out there, right? And I know you're not suggesting that, obviously, but yeah, like he's got, again, this is similar to what I was mentioning with Lohrei. Like this is what you want. You want him to learn and to play through this, and you want him to learn the NHL level. And it's easy to look at Poitras having, what is it? Let me see here. What's he got? 7 points in 12 games. I mean, that's for a 19-year-old, it's beyond impressive. And so sometimes you see 7 points in 12 games and you think, well, this kid's got it all figured out. He doesn't. He's still learning. He's still learning the speed. He's still learning the strength of the players. What's impressive is that he's still being a very effective and productive player while learning all this. But, a game like last night, it's like, yeah, let that happen. Let him learn on the fly. But no, Trent Frederick will not be somebody who's going to make people not play hockey against Patra. But again, that's good. Let him continue to grow and develop.
Yeah, and I kind of mentioned this in the last podcast, like Patra's production on Saturday came away from his usual line, and I didn't love that line again on Monday. Frederick, Patra, Geeky. I thought they were really quiet for the most part, spent a lot of time in their own zone, and that's 2 games in a row of that. Yes, they're road games against good teams, but guess what? That's what happens in the NHL. Like you don't get to pick and choose matchups all the time. So, a really good third line is a line you feel like you can throw out there against anyone, or you feel like, they're not going to be disadvantaged in any matchup. And that line, I sort of think, has been on the losing end of some matchups when Detroit and then Dallas were able to get their top lines out against them. So I think, I don't want to say like I'm totally giving up on that line, because I'm not. And I think the top 6 has shown some potential, even though, maybe the goal totals haven't been there. So I would be okay with Montgomery for once, like actually just letting things ride and not, constantly throwing everything in a blender. But I do think that line has to be better than it's been the last 2 games.
And I haven't, Bridget, to specifically answer your question, I haven't loved that line conceptually since it's been put together. Like I think that iron sharpens iron, and I look at Trent Frederick and I look at Morgan Geeky, and I kind of see, 2 big bodies, but neither one is the fleetest of foot. They're certainly not getting up and down the ice with a ton of quickness, and they don't have a lot of flash to their game, or a lot of they can't really create offense out of nowhere like somebody like a Brad Marchand or a Jake DeBrusk, or somebody, obviously Pasternak in the top 6. Like those guys, I just think you gotta, sometimes if you want to get the best out of a player, you got to put them around players that help them optimize their skill set. I don't think that's Trent Frederick and Morgan Geeky for Matt Patra.
No, and to that point, the biggest asset that Matt Patra can bring is his hockey IQ. Well, you have to have guys that are thinking what he's thinking and on the same page.
Are you calling Trent Frederick and Morgan Geeky dumb?
No, I'm not.
She's not calling them smart, though.
I'm saying you need people that are thinking the game. They have to know what each other's thinking before the play is made. Like you have to know, okay, say you're Matt Patra. Okay, I know Marchand's going to be here, but he also has to be expecting you to look for that pass the same way. So conceptually, it seems like you're better off putting him with players who have that kind of IQ as well, that are aware of what each other want to do. And you're better off playing that kind of a line consistently together so that they can build up even more and more of knowing where each other wants the puck and wants to be on the ice. So he did look better in his shifts with with Pasternak, obviously, and with Zacha, and at times with Marchand. So he's going to look better next to better players. Everybody is. But he's also able to show off his skill set. The question becomes, who's the better setup guy for Pasta? Like, do you trust Van Riemsdyk and the dynamic that they have with Zacha as a better setup? Because I thought that line was – I thought that Pasta was a little bit quiet. He had one shot on the power play off the post. But in terms of trying to activate Pasternak's offense, I didn't think they did that a lot in the Dallas game. And so maybe Patra is somebody that's looking to set him up in different ways. I thought that they could have done better. And I'm not saying that's Van Riemsdyk's fault at all. He's a completely different style player. He's somebody that's going to the net. But it's a totally different dynamic when it was Patra on that line with Zacha and Pasternak.
So just to kind of finish up some of these opening shifts, and then we want to jump into a little bit of brief mailbag. Scott, you look like you have something you want to say.
Quickly on Potter, because part of this equation, and Montgomery mentioned it when he moved Potter back to the third line, is they're trying to manage his minutes, because I think when he was up on that first line, he had back-to-back games over 17 minutes. And I'm sure Potter felt great. He's 19 years old, like, you know, of course. But the Bruins also know he's never played an NHL season. He's never played 82 games. And at some point, he is going to hit a wall. So they're trying to manage it leading up to that. And, you know, try to limit his minutes a little bit. And part of that is moving him down in the lineup. But, you know, I think there are going to be times where you're going to have to move him up in the lineup, because you're not going to win much with an ineffective third line. And people on YouTube seeing Bridget and Brian smirking, we got a side check going on that's distracting me. I should just exit out of it.
No. Ignore us. We're insulting Scott in the side check.
I know. This is brutal. This is like on like the radio shows when like one of the producers would be doing trending and the host is just like talking in their ear to try to distract them.
Oh, are you talking about what Fourier does to me every single time?
That is exactly what I was thinking of.
Dancing and start going, trying to mess me up, and then I turn around and I'm like, get out of here. And the radio listeners have no idea what's going on. And I'm just like, because I'm yelling at him like, Fourier, get out of here.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Scott. We didn't think you could see us. Sorry about that. But so quickly on the 10-1-1 start, how have you guys viewed them? We know defensively and in net the Bruins are, you know, as good as really anybody from a structural standpoint and a personnel standpoint, but speed-wise, offense-wise, how have you liked their game against Toronto and LA and Dallas? Some of these teams that we expect to be there, obviously none of those teams, in my opinion, are Vegas or Colorado. But how do you think visually the Bruins have matched up when it comes to pace of play and just, you know, they're 10-1-1. Obviously, the record says they're amazing, but how you viewed the games against the tougher competition so far? I
think the last two games in particular, they're spending too much time in their own zone, and they're now in the season they're kind of like right around a 50% Corsi team, like basically middle of the pack and shot attempts, but that's gone down. And part of that is they've been shorthanded on defense. Like, we can't ignore that. But I do think it's a formula that puts a lot of pressure on your goalies, and their goalies have been up to it, especially Swayman. So they can get away with it more than other teams can. But at some point, and it might be as soon as McAvoy returns, as soon as they get healthier on defense. But, you know, you do want to see them establish themselves in the offensive zone more and spend more time down there, not be able to kill plays quicker in their own end, get out, get in transition. Montgomery's talked all season about being faster in transition. I think that's still something they're working on. So, yeah, look, they're 10-1-1. It's hard to complain about too much, but like that's one nit that I would pick is they're getting pinned into their own zone quite a bit.
So none of us here think that it's smoke and mirrors as far as them being a playoff team, right? But is it a bit smoke and mirrors them being first place in the conference, even if they finish the season as the first place team in the East? Like, once the playoffs start, as we learned last year, it doesn't matter. So do you think them being the cream of the crop in the East is a bit smoke and mirrors, or too early to tell?
I think we kind of had a similar question a few podcasts ago, and I don't think it is. I think that they've shown their strengths, but I don't feel like they have a floor that's bad enough to drop them very far from where they are, right? Like, if you think about it, I don't think that every single person on this team and every single line on this team is way outperforming their abilities. So it's not like we're expecting to see a fall off in that kind of play. So I think that their ceiling is first and their floor is also like second. Like I feel like that's how good the team is in the way that they've been able to find the depth that they found this season.
Yeah, I don't think it's smoke and mirrors. I just think there's still stuff that they're working on and need to get better at. But like that said, even when they've been kind of outpossessed and outchanced, Montgomery, another thing he's highlighted, he's made a point of emphasis all year, is winning at the net front. And right now they're top 10 in the NHL in high danger chances for, and they were inside the top 10 in high danger chances against. I think Monday in Dallas, that game bumped them down to 11th, I believe. But they're still up there. So they are doing that pretty well. Like even when they're spending time in their zone, you know, most of the high danger chances they've given up have been off the rush. I don't know if you guys saw this, but on NESN pregame before Monday's game, they had the stat from Sport Logic, which is not publicly available stuff, so we don't actually get to see it. But they had the Bruins giving up the second most odd man rushes per game. So you clean that up, like you just don't give up as many odd man rushes. Their in-zone defense, I think, has been really solid. So, you know, they are winning those net front battles that Montgomery has emphasized. And that's playoff style hockey. So that's a good sign. So, yeah, I don't think it's smoke and mirrors at all. I do think if they weren't getting such great goaltending, we might be talking about a team that's 7-4-1, 8-3-1 instead of 10-1-1. And that's still a really good team, but it's one that's more towards the pack and not running away from it.
Imagine just like I said this a couple episodes ago, but if you're the rest of the league, and it's even more true now because as more time has passed, but imagine if like Pittsburgh just loses Crosby and Malkin, and then in the very next year, without replacing them externally, the Penguins are 10-1-1. It's like, what? Like
they might take that after this year start. God, we had in our season previews, I was like, oh, they're going to be like a bubble playoff team. And as of right now, what are they, bottom 5? No, they're 6th worst in the league. So is Ottawa's not doing great either. So like there's some teams that Pittsburgh has certainly underperformed for what that fan base expected. And I know that's not really what your point was, Brian.
Right. No.
But there's teams ahead of them right now that I was not thinking would be ahead of them. Like they're so far out of the wild card race. It's not even funny. So yeah, the Sabres, the Canadians, those are teams that are in front of them right now. So
yeah, no, it's just my point was more or less just like it must just be infuriating. Like
yes.
For teams and fans around the league. How is Boston 10-1-1? They just lost their top 2 centers, and do they go out and sign a free agent number 1 center? No. How is this possible? Like, no, what team can get away with that? Only the Bruins or a team like them who just has stout defense and high-end goaltending.
Yeah. No, I think the Toronto fan base gets frustrated easily, but they're definitely probably one of the fan bases that was frustrated about this situation. I was watching a little bit of Canadian TV, like reaction to the Marchand, like over the top reaction to the Marchand thing with Liljegren, and this was like their Today Show, like their legit like morning show, not like a sports show, like their legit morning show had about like a 15-minute discourse about how much they hate like the Leafs response, and like I can now tell why nobody wants to play for the Leafs.
Well,
I
think if it's the one that I saw, I think that was Sid. Is it Sid 60 or something like that? Like he used to have a sports talk show on Sportsnet, and I think he went to do like the morning show you were saying. So he's kind of like the Mike Felger of Toronto. Like he has like very like pessimistic takes on all their sports teams up there, but it'd be like if Felger works for like, went to work for, I don't know, 7 News Boston or something, or I don't know.
Yeah, it was just insanity. Like I don't know. We're not trying to go on this tangent, but there was one other thing we wanted to cover before we go completely off base and enter back into the side chat, which was we put out a poll having to do with the conversation we had last podcast with the Draisaitl, Allmark, Patra crazy giant trade, and we got the results back. And Scott, I don't know if you want to pull up what the poll results were, and we also had a lot of comments on YouTube and on Twitter. And we do actually want to ask another question coming out of this, but Scott, results.
And Facebook had hundreds of comments too.
Yeah.
Keep talking because I have to find it.
Well,
Okay.
surprise. When Scott will read the results, but it was when you put out this poll to a New England audience, a lot of people are going to side with their homegrown talent and their players as opposed to an unbiased national perspective. So I wasn't too surprised with the results and some of the comments because a lot of it really was kind of like not well thought out. It was just like, Bruins avatars just saying in all caps, "No way," like with no explanation. Because God forbid, like you acquire literally probably the second best offensive player in the world, and have to give up like Jake DeBrusk and a couple of other pieces that nobody really knew of a month ago. Just saying. Scott, do you have the results yet? Was that enough filibustering?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So over 600 votes, 80% no. And obviously our audience is mostly Bruins fans. So that gives you, pretty clearly the Boston perspective. I think it's interesting though, because there's like different levels of, some were just like straight up no, and then like countered with ridiculous offers that would never get accepted. Whereas like, it should just be DeBrusk, Allmark in a second. And it's like, well, okay, the Oilers are laughing at you then.
Who are they getting for that? Jay Woodcroft?
Right. Like, yeah. So it's like, can we like try to keep it realistic? Because like that's, I ultimately came down on no, but I was like, I just would want to find a way to downgrade one of those pieces. Like, can I somehow keep Patra or not give up a first round pick? Like something like that. And I do think there were some more reasonable responses that were like, Patra's the sticking point, like take him out and I'm okay with the rest of it, or replace him with, maybe a slightly lesser prospect or something. It's, I do feel like, and this certainly wasn't everyone who responded no, but I do feel like there's a decent amount of like really underrating Leon Draisaitl. I mean, we went over his numbers, but it's like over the last 6 years, his 82 game average is 51 goals, 68 assists for 119 points. He has 77 points in 49 playoff games. Last year, he scored 13 goals in 12 playoff games. Like, and it can play physical. Like, is obviously a bigger body. He's not like the biggest hitter in the world, but he'll use that body. And I do feel like if the Bruins made a blockbuster trade like this and Draisaitl comes and has like 15 points in his first 9 games, all of a sudden like Bruins fans would be in love with him and be like, holy crap, like this is like I wrote in the article I wrote up on this, like he would be their best offensive center since at least Adam Oates, and you'd possibly have to go back even further than that.
He'd be their best offensive player. He like Leon Draisaitl. There aren't many players in the world that are better offensively than David Pastrnak or Brad Marchand. He's one of them. Like he is. Like he is. David Pastrnak's been a top 5 offensive player in the world the last handful of seasons. Leon Draisaitl has been like a top 2. Like it's. I mean, Scott, those numbers you said, like, can you like just eyeballing like roughly what's Leon Draisaitl's point per game average as an NHLer, and his playoff point per game is like almost 2 points per game in the playoffs in the postseason, and his regular season is probably like 1.6 or 1.7 points per game. That's what we're talking about, and people are up in arms. No. Jake DeBrusk can't get rid of Allmark or a first-round draft pick or Lysell. Number one, Lysel's never played a game in the NHL. No first-round draft pick will probably end up becoming nearly as good as Leon Draisaitl's jockstrap. And then Jake DeBrusk could walk after this season. It's like people they fall in love with their own players, and I admit it's a very difficult decision. It was a very difficult yes for me. But people, to your point, Scott, don't realize how good Draisaitl is. Now, people did mention if you lose DeBrusk and you lose Lysell, now and in the future, and Scott, in your article, you kind of wrote the projected Bruins lines this year if they were to get Draisaitl. And of course, I don't like Trent Frederick, and I think you had him in like the top 6. Like, I don't like that. So that's something would have to be changed at the deadline. So your winger depth would be depleted a little bit. But Draisaitl is just literally one of the best hockey players in the world.
Yeah, just quickly, but before we kick it to Bridget, but yeah, his points per game since 2019, 1.55, 1.50, 1.38, 1.60, and now 1.27 through 11 games this year.
I mean, there's a reason why this didn't just die once it was proposed. Like, there's a reason why the debate has continued on this trade, because you could see wanting to make it work, right? You could see wanting to make a deal work to get Leon Draisaitl if you're the Bruins. And if you're the Oilers, you could see wanting to fix your goaltending and add some prospects and add a first round pick. But I think the sticking point for most people was Patra. And the funny thing about that is if you in the offseason had suggested that was a fair trade, everybody would have laughed in your face and said the Oilers weren't getting enough. So that's the thing. And
by the way, Oilers fans hate the trade too. Like the overwhelming majority of Oilers fans who responded to Butcher Gross weren't doing it either.
You realize if you did a poll and didn't allow Bruins fans or Oilers fans to vote, you realize every other fan would be like, who's Matt Patra? And no disrespect to him. Like, I love him and I want him on the Bruins for like the next 20 years. I'm just saying, like, people aren't understanding, like, what's Matt Patra's ceiling in the NHL? Like, we don't know, but like maybe a 60-point guy, maybe 70. Scott just read off his numbers. People don't realize how good of a player he is. And guess what? Next season, go out there and sign a couple wingers. I mean, to me, it's not even like it's. I mean, I've said my piece.
I feel like I can explain it from both sides why they don't like it. Like, okay, imagine you're a Bruins fan and they're like, someone's like, we're gonna trade David Pastrnak for a goalie and like some prospects. You'd be like, no, like what? That's such an unsexy trade. That's probably what people in Edmonton feel like. They probably feel like you don't have to give up that to find a better goalie. You know, Allmark is not the only option out there to add a goalie. And you're also thinking maybe this season's done anyway. Maybe we should just try to extend Draisaitl and keep him around and figure out the whole goalie situation at some point this year with something simpler or some point in the off season. Like, do we really need to blow this up and get rid of one of our top players, one of the best players in the world? And if you're a Bruins fan, you're like, well, we actually kind of like what this team looks like right now. We kind of like and are excited to see what Patra becomes and don't want to get bit by, okay, trade him away and he's good for the next 18 years and Draisaitl's 9 years older than him, so he's not as long, or maybe you aren't able to extend him. I could see those arguments being both sides.
You know what's interesting is I could see a world where Connor McDavid has more team success and Leon Draisaitl has more team success when they're not together. Like, if the Oilers were to trade Draisaitl and you get like a legit goaltender like Allmark and a couple other pieces to surround McDavid with some stability in net and whatever, and then Draisaitl goes to a team like Boston where they have, again, they have all those things as well. It's just it's interesting. And again, like I said off the top of the podcast, Edmonton has waived Jack Campbell, so I don't know what's going to happen with that. I don't think anybody's going to really want him. Maybe, but I don't know.
Well, I think it's just so risky. Like, the risk reward is so difficult to assess with this trade package. Well, because it has both old and new players. It has players of all different positions. It has needs, like both people are filling needs, but also at the exclusion of or at the demise of other strengths that they have.
Yeah, I mean for Edmonton too, like Brian, that split, like Draisaitl may very well get traded at some point because he's up after 2025 and is probably looking at something in the Austin Matthews neighborhood, which he just got $13.25 million. And then McDavid's up after 2026 and he's already at 12.5. What on earth is his next deal going to be? Like, that is, if they do keep both, that is a ton of money committed to two players who admittedly are two of the 3 or 4 best players in the world, but they've already struggled to be able to build a good team around them. It's only going to get tougher if they're taking up, an even larger percentage of your salary cap. So I don't think the idea of the Oilers trading Draisaitl is like totally insane. Like, I think that's something that they're kind of going to have to explore. But yeah, I mean, it's,
and
I don't know.
Not for nothing. Also, the Bruins aren't sold yet that Patra can be a number 1 center or Zacha could be a number 1 center. Like, it might just be that the Bruins have a couple of number 2 centers and Charlie Coyle. Like, we don't, and so the Bruins might not know who their future number 1 center is. You like to think it could be Patra or it could be Zacha, but we don't know, and they don't know.
In that case, though, don't you see the Bruins running into the same cap issue that the Oilers would run into with the contract that Pastrnak has, plus a Draisaitl contract that's really up there? And then you're going to want to have some of the younger guys that you developed around on the books for a little bit because those contracts are more manageable.
I think the Bruins are probably in better shape than Edmonton. Like, Edmonton also has Darnell Nurse at 9.25. Bruins have McAvoy at 9.5, but I'll take McAvoy 1,000 times out of 1,000 over Darnell Nurse. So, yeah, I mean, look, anytime you have that many big contracts, building out the rest of the roster is challenging for sure. But, in recent years, we've seen Sweeney be able to get some guys in on cheaper deals. If you have young players contributing, like they're on cheaper deals, it's a challenge, but it's not impossible, I guess, is what I would say. And to Brian's point, like, Draisaitl answers all your number 1 center questions, and then you just figure out what to do behind him. I know, like, obviously it's all far-fetched. I don't think it's happening. But it is fascinating. Certainly got a lot of reaction. The vast majority of it from Bruins fans, which was don't do it. But I don't know. I'm certainly much more torn than the majority on this one.
Yeah, I'm like scrolling through our comments on Twitter. And, some people were proposing their own versions of this. A lot of them were off the mark.
Yeah, they would only do it if it was like
this one,
Forbert and Bob Essenza.
No, this one is
hey, the Oilers might do that because I do think part of their problem is coaching. Like, I'm sorry, like Jack Campbell and Stuart Skinner should not suck as much as they do. Like, those guys aren't, like, there is some talent there, and they just can't get it out of those guys.
We're not willing to trade goalie Bob. Okay, we're not. Bob Essenza stays.
Montgomery was after Game 7 last year.
He's untouchable. So this one says Allmark, DeBrusk, and Forbert for Draisaitl. I think.
So here's the thing, guys. There's a salary cap, and that trade doesn't make sense. The Oilers can't do that. They don't have enough cap space.
Nope. They don't. And also, I feel like that Forbert one was thrown in just because this person doesn't like Forbert. Like, it's just like, also take this because we're done. And we don't, just because, what if it was Lohrei instead of Patra?
Yeah, I saw someone mention that. Like that's certainly interesting. I think in my mind, I probably valued those two about equally. So it doesn't fundamentally change the deal for me. I guess it would just be, what is Edmonton looking? Obviously, Edmonton is gonna want a. I would think they'd want a center if they're trading Draisaitl.
Yeah, they would.
But I don't know. That team also needs a ton of help on defense. So
I definitely you value Lohrei and Patra equally. I mean, based on positional needs, I think Patra is head and shoulders more because you have Lindholm locked in, and I mean, I like Lohrai's Patra's a necessity. Lohrei at this current stage is kind of a luxury.
Yeah, I guess I'm saying in terms of how I evaluate them as players and what they can be. Like, yeah, I agree. Right now, Patra fills more of a need, both in the present and the future. But like, and you're right, like Lohrei would probably be slightly easier to move because you have Lindholm and McAvoy locked up. But like, I'm not telling Edmonton that. Like in my mind, if I'm talking to Edmonton, it's like, no, these both are very highly valued players, as they should be, because they both have a lot of potential.
I feel like I'm much more apt to do the trade if it's Lohrei because of what Brian mentioned. Like you already have McAvoy and Lindholm tied up long term. Like if you could get Carlo already still has years on his contract, but if you could keep him around, I feel like your defense is more set than your center position. And if you were able to keep Patra, then you'd go from being like trying to fill center gaps to being probably the most elite team at center in the league.
But if you're getting Draisaitl, then you also have Draisaitl at center, Zacha through 2027, Coyle through 2026. Like now there's not a need at center either. So just pointing that out.
Yeah. Well, it's all hypothetical. And one thing that we wanted to mention before we finish this debate was I put the little mailbag graphic up because if you have an idea that you think is better than this one, send us your email, put a comment at the bottom of this YouTube video, tweet at us your better version, but it has to be realistic. Like we're not talking about sending Forbert for Draisaitl.
Yeah, well, and specifically, I guess to make it even more open-ended, like, are you open to trading a goalie at all? Like this has obviously once again been a talk radio topic, but trying to keep it among maybe more serious hockey minds, like are people open to it at all? So, shoot us your ideas for just how you would handle the goaltending. Are you all in on keeping Ullmark and Swayman together for at least this season, or are you open to trading one of them?
I mean, I know the biggest strength of the Bruins, and every Bruins fan will say it, or most of them, is the tandem they have in goal. I get it, but all I will say is it is an absolute luxury to have two of the top goalies in the league on the same roster. You don't need two of the top goalies in the league in the same roster. If you have two, that means you'll still have one and part with another. Like you watch Jeremy Swayman and his composure, and at his age, I mean, I think he's a pretty special goaltender. I think he's only going to get better and better. And I think Ullmark is phenomenal too. And whatever, I just think you can't go wrong. I think if you keep them, lovely. If you trade one of them, you still have one of the best goalies in the world, I think. But I think it's kind of a win-win.
But Brian, what about the goalie hugs? What about the goalie hugs?
The goalie hugs are gonna have to come to an end at some point, right?
I'm just kidding. Are we supposed to answer this right now? Because I have thoughts, but like I don't want to like we were asking people to send in the question.
Yeah. No,
we've already run long, so let's get.
I want to say something.
It's a little appetizer, It's Cheesecake Factory nachos, Just keep eating the appetizer. We'll get the entrees maybe on Friday.
Fine.
All right. Do either of you have? Well, Bridget, I know you wanted to have something to say, but
I'll wait
We'll have that cliffhanger so that people, they have to listen. Right now, people are like, oh, come on, Bridget, say it. But nope, you're going to have to wait till next episode now.
Yeah.
So that's a cliffhanger. That's a major league tease.
So send us ideas at the Skate Pod on Twitter, skatepod@weei.com, email.
And anything else either.
Or just comment on YouTube. Yeah, any other ideas, any other thoughts, what you want to see them do with Lohrei, and anything at all.
Any questions that ever come across your mind. All right, Bridget and Scott, that's good. Wrap it up there.
We're good.
All right. Thank you all for listening. We'll talk to you very soon. Hey guys, thanks for watching the Skate Podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
Not in front of a screen. You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and leave